Hi, this is Matthew Almeida and welcome back to my channel. Today, dear friends, we are going to discuss about a very interesting topic. The topic that has been making wildfires for so many years. The right wing used this topic to instigate people, spread manipulated history, and then spread their agenda, propagate their propaganda, and use it for their own personal benefits. I'm talking about the so-called Kathro Kahmbo or the Pillar of Inquisition, which is there in Old Goa. Now, is this pillar really a pillar of Inquisition? Is it really a Kathro Kahmbo where during the Inquisition, hands of people were cut of those people who were not ready to convert? We are going to try and find answers for all these questions in detailed. थोडे वस्तू कोंकणीन सांगता हो व्हिडिओ हांव चड करून इंग्लिशीन करतलो पूण हो व्हिडिओ सोंपताच ताच्या शेवटाक थोडेशेच कोंकणी उतरांनी हाचे हांवें कितें उलयलां ताची एक सामरी कशी दितलो. Dear friends, the Goa Inquisition has been a topic of much discussion and majorly a tool for spreading hatred, hate propaganda, misinformation, and so on. The right-wing organizations misinterpret, manipulate, and misuse history and archaeological resources to authenticate their claims. One of these things is the so-called Pillar of Inquisition, which is also called Kathro Kahmbo, which is there in Old Goa. It refers to that pillar, which is named Pelorino Novo, which currently stands under the flyover on the highway from Old Goa to Ponda. Now there's a junction there, the road going to Karmali is just there under the flyover there. Now claims are made that those Hindus who refused to convert to Christianity through the Inquisition were tied to this pillar and were burnt and their hands were cut. They also claim that people's hands were cut, breasts of women were ripped off and so on. And while proposing this narrative, they drag in the missionaries and the church and try to taint it as criminal, especially St. Francis Xavier. How much truth is there in this narrative of this pillar? Is it really the Inquisition pillar as it is claimed? Did people really undergo harsh physical punishments for not converting? Claims are also made that St. Francis Xavier is responsible for the Inquisition. Is it so? In my previous videos, my dear friends, I have tried to make it very clear that St. Francis Xavier is not directly responsible for the Inquisition, and perhaps if he knew that it is going to be so cruel, he would have done something about it. Let's just analyze the letter which St. Francis Xavier had written in month of May in 1546, where he asked for the Inquisition in India. I have made a video on this, but let me say the same things again in this video as well. St. Francis Xavier wrote this particular letter from Amboina, which is in Indonesia today, where he mentions the fortresses. Now, what was the reason he wrote this letter? What was the reason he asked for the Inquisition? Now, there are two things we need to keep in mind here. St. Francis Xavier is not the only person who asked for the Inquisition. Two more people had already asked for the Inquisition. First is Miguel Vaz, who was the Vicar General of Goa, and then there was another missionary who had asked for the Inquisition in Goa. Now, what happens when St. Francis Xavier is here, especially when he went to Indonesia, Amboina, which is a fortress? In fact, not only one fortress, there are fortresses in Amboina, and that is the exact word which he uses there, fortresses. In Goa, at that time, there was only one fortress, that was in Santistev. So you cannot use the word fortresses for Goa in that context. What happens here is, St. Francis Xavier observes that these Portuguese Christians are not living a good Christian life, and they are being a bad example as Christians for the newly converted Christians. There are those who live by, as he says, Mosaic law and Mohammedan law. That is to say, the Jewish law and the Islamic law. And they were hardly living a life according to the Christian law. So, the reason for him to ask for the Inquisition were not Hindus or Muslims or whatsoever. It were Christians themselves who were not living a very good life, a Christian life, so to say. Imagine back in those days, a lot of things were happening which were anti-Christian. There were people of different religions, and these Christians were getting influenced by that. So I hope it is clear that Saint Francis Xavier asked for the Inquisition not because of people of other religions, but because of Christians themselves, the Portuguese especially. Now, the Inquisition was not established in Goa when he was alive, when Saint Francis Xavier was alive. It was established in Goa 8 years after his death, and that too not by King John III, who was the king of Portugal when Saint Francis Xavier wrote this letter. After John III came two more kings, and this Inquisition was established. And so it was established by a different king, not the same king to whom Saint Francis Xavier is written. It was not established during Saint Francis Xavier's time. It was established years, almost a decade after his death. So how can Saint Francis Xavier be directly responsible for this? He cannot be. The Inquisition was a special court by the church to investigate on heretics who were Christians already, but were involved in rituals and practices and beliefs which were not Christians, and thus distort the Christian message. The accused would be brought to the inquisitor, who would then investigate, and if found guilty, would be given due punishment. Now, first of all, we need to be clear about who the accused could be, who could be tried under Inquisition, and what were the punishments given. The Inquisition was meant only for the Christians or the Novo Christian, the new Christians, the new converts, and not anyone who is a non-Christian. It was meant to discourage and deter Christians from getting involved into some unchristian practices which could be superstitious and idolatrous, like black magic, human sacrifices, etc. Many times I've tried to tell people that, these people, when we say that the new Christians were falling back to their old practices, this does not mean that they were doing it out of love for their previous religion. It was out of fear, because those people may be still believing in other spirits, existence of other spirits as well. And imagine, in those days, practices were not only about going and doing a puja or a worship. Nothing. There were sacrifices happening on large scale. Not only animal sacrifices, but human sacrifices as well. I present before you two cases in the modern times which happened. One is the case with Manohar Parrikar when he was building the bridge between Moji and Sholim, that side, and the locals there came and said this bridge may not stand strong, we have to make a Narbali. So from where did this belief of Narbali come? It's an ancient Indian belief. And very recently, my dear friends, these days the wild news is going very wild about the child that was killed in Usgaon, and the villagers claim that it was for child sacrifice. Now imagine if these things are happening today. Back in those days, they must be practicing it on a large scale. These things were very prevalent here. We have evidences of that, where skulls and bones of lot of human bones have been excavated in different sites, and documented evidences also tell us that such practices were very, very relevant. What were the punishments given to these accused or those who were found to be convicts? Pope Lucius III was the first pope who established the first Inquisition as an institution to examine the heretics like the Waldensians and the Cathars. He promulgated the Inquisition through his bull Ad Abolendam in the year 1184. However, according to this bull, the duty of the clergy was only to examine the heretics and bring them to the civil executors to be given the deserved punishment. Violence and torture in this period was hardly used, or to most extent not used at all. The only punishment they got was deprivation of certain rights and imprisonment. The priests and the bishops who supported heresies were deprived of their ecclesiastical office. Over the years, the political powers of the church had grown, especially after crowning King Charles, as he was called, Charlemagne. The Inquisition, begun by Pope Lucius III, had failed to stop the eruption of heresies, and some viewed it as too soft upon the heretics, as they did not care for the consequences. under a lot of pressure from the ecclesiastical leaders and the growing tensions between Ferdinand II and the rise of more heresies, Pope Gregory IX had introduced institution of the Inquisition as an ecclesiastical congregation which was meant to execute the heretics. However, the execution and trial would be done by civil rulers only. The sole purpose of the Inquisition was to deal with the heretics who were still on the rise, and since the admittance of heresies from their mouths, Pope Innocent IV introduced torture in the Inquisition through the bull Ad Extirpanda on 15 May 1252, following the murder of Saint Peter of Verona by the Cathars. And however, torture was just a last resort, and it was certainly not meant to put someone to death. Now, they had to follow certain parameters before they go and torture somebody physically. So they had to make sure that it did not cause loss of life or limb. It was called citra membri diminutionem et mortis periculum. That it was used only once. That the inquisitor deemed the evidence against the accused to be virtually certain. The bull conceded to the state a portion of the property to be confiscated from the convicted heretics. The state in return assumed the burden of carrying out the penalty. The relevant portion of the bull read, now this is what it says, when those adjudged guilty of heresy have been given up to the civil power by the bishop or his representative or the Inquisition, the podesta or chief magistrate of the city shall take them at once and shall, within 5 days at the most, execute the laws made against them. This is what the document says. Now, so what happened is only the head of state had the duty to execute the heretics after following rigorous procedure by the inquisitors. Therefore, to say that people's hands were cut or breasts were stripped off of women, it doesn't fit in very well within these laws of Inquisition and how it worked. It is also supported by the evidences from the case files of the Goa Inquisition, which are available in Arquivo Nacional de Rio de Janeiro in Brazil and Arquivo Torre de Tombo in Lisboa in Portugal, which are now available online for access. Now, thanks to Ellen Machado and Dr. Bruno Fettler for this great work, because it's they who have worked hard to make it available. So, it is very clear to these evidences that people's hands were not cut, legs were not cut, breasts were not stripped off, and in fact, scourging person to death and even starving them to death was not allowed. So from where did these theories come up about Kathro Kahmbo and Inquisition, Pillar and all? So most of the ideas of Inquisition in Goa are borrowed from the misinterpretations of the book written by A.K. Priolkar in Goa Inquisition, who did not access the primary sources. It is better to read Alan Machado's book, Goa Inquisition, Facts, Fiction, Factoids, who has accessed the primary sources. The right wing also borrow a lot of things about Inquisition from Richard Zimler's novel, Guardian of the Dawn. Now they still borrow it even though it is written in that novel that it is a work of fiction. So imagine they don't analyze these accounts. They don't analyze that Richard Zimler's book is a novel. It is clearly written in the foreword that it is a book of fiction, a work of fiction, and yet these people start thinking that these are realities that happened, whereas primary sources do not support anything like this. Now, the narrative of the Kathro Kahmbo or Pillar of Inquisition is nothing old, it's very recent. First of all, the Inquisition happened not only in Portugal, my dear friends, or is not in Spain. It happened in many places, like in Rome and wherever the Spanish and the Portuguese went about, even in Brazil. Now, if you go to these places, there are many pillars or pillories found in Portugal, as narrated by Antonio Manuel Amar Rosa's master's thesis, Os Pelourinhos da Lusitânia, 1820 to 1974. Also in Brazil, etc., where the Portuguese had their controlled and imposed Inquisition, highlighted in Antonio Bocaro's 17th century work, Book of the Plans of All Fortresses, Towns and Villages of the East Indies. But from none of these places, except Goa, talk about any pillars used for cutting limbs, hands, or physical punishments. The Pelourinho Novo, or so-called Kathro Kahmbo in Goa, is first clearly depicted on the late 16th century map by Dutch traveller Jan Huygen van Linschoten and the early 17th century map of Old Goa by Manuel Godinho de Heredia. The pillory is later depicted in a sketch in the 1886 book A India Portuguesa by Portuguese explorer Antonio Lopes Mendes under the subtitle Pelourinho Novo. In 2008, respected Goan heritage activist Percival Norona explained in a news report that the original Pelourinho Novo had fallen into disrepair after the liberation of Goa and was found about 20 meters away from the original location. It was the Ataid family who later relocated and re-erected it on their property after completing the construction of their house. The property with the house is now disannexed from the Pelourinho by the road construction. So you'll see a gap between the Pelourinho Novo and the house of the Ataid family. The author has confirmed the legitimacy of the claim by verifying land records and assets and asserts that the property located across the road on survey number 122/1 or bar 1 of Ella village is indeed owned by Dr. Pedro de Ataid. If the pillar truly held significant historical importance, it would not have been neglected or abandoned by the government just like that, only to gain historical recognition at a much later period. The original site of the Pelourinho Novo is said to have been where the Gandhi statue stands today. Yet, there are no written records linking the original site to the cutting of hands or its association with the Inquisition. Erstwhile, this site was where 7 roads converged along with the main commercial street, Rua Direita, as noted by Walter Rosa. Jan Huygen van Linschoten, in his work, makes an excellent description of this street. It is astonishing to say, as he says, to see here the crowd of sellers and buyers during the market hours. Persons of all creeds and races mingle together with large umbrellas in their hands, which protect them from the heat of the sun in the hot season and the rain during the monsoon. Linschoten, Historia de la Navegación, 1596. The Goa Archaeology and Archives Department is set to declare the artifact, that is Pelourinho Novo, a state-protected monument under the Goa, Daman and Diu Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act 1978. According to Serra 1986, Pelourinhos were typically places where corporal offenders of the law faced punishment such as whipping. They also served as sites for the public announcement of municipal decrees or laws. However, no historical evidence suggests that the specific pillar that we are talking about today, that is Pelourinho Novo or Kathro Kahmbo, was anything related to the Inquisition or any corporal punishment was given to that, or if it was used for giving any corporal punishment. Now, in the vicinity of Old Goa, in front of the lawns of St. Francis of Assisi Church, that is within Say Cathedral campus, stands another pillar that, while resembling a Pelourinho, did not function as one. That is, it was not used for whipping people and all. The base of this pillar has been hollowed out to accommodate plumbing, with metal spigots installed and connected to a small stone basin or trough, transforming it into a public water fountain. An ASI publication from 2004 titled World Heritage Series Old Goa, as well as the 1979 Gazetteer of the Union Territory of Goa, Daman and Diu District Gazetteer titles the monument as the Pillory, a lone pillar on a raised platform, and is of basalt with iron rings, and states that it might have once been a part of an ancient Brahminical temple. Now, these publications make no mention of its use in the Inquisition or as the site where hands were cut or severed. According to a news report from Deccan Herald dated 19 September 2020, similar pillars are found in Hampi, and is a well-known fact that these pillars were used for mutilation and physical punishment by the Vijayanagar kings. The report clearly states that flogging, whipping, and mutilation of body parts was a practice of the Vijayanagar kings. You can read more about this article on Deccan Herald. I'll put the link in the description. Namit Arora is a renowned journalist who mostly works for The Wire. He writes that cutting off hands and legs of criminals was a common practice in the Vijayanagar Empire. However, there is absolutely no documented evidence, neither from the Portuguese sources nor accounts of any contemporary travelers who visited Portuguese India, that this Pelourinho Novo or Kathro Kahmbo was used for any punishments like this. Therefore, my dear friends, it has become common these days to narrate distorted history and to fuel propaganda. So this Kathro Kahmbo or Pelourinho Novo, what is called as Inquisition pillar, may not have been the Kathro Kahmbo which the Portuguese used, or Portuguese may have never even used a pillar to cut hands under the Inquisition. If it was a civil punishment, it's a other business. But under Inquisition, this pillar was certainly not used for cutting hands. So this pillar could be a relic, could be a remains of the Vijayanagar Empire, who used to use this type of punishments like cutting of hands or limbs or body parts in order to punish people for their great crimes. It could be part of the Vijayanagar kingdom. Therefore, my dear friends, it has become very common these days to narrate distorted history to fuel propaganda and hate speech. And when such narratives are confronted by historical evidences, these people get upset and become violent. Will our freedom of speech be suppressed only to support false narratives and enslave us once again? Where is our intellectual freedom and freedom of speech? We need to challenge this. And so, my dear friends, to conclude, I would say that this Kathro Kahmbo, as Uday Bhemre has said, as many other historians have said, has nothing to do with the Inquisition. In fact, hands were not cut during Inquisition and under Inquisition. If this pillar was used and is popularly known as Kathro Kahmbo, probably it was very popular during the Vijayanagar Empire or even during Adil Shah's Empire. कोंकणीन थोड्या आतां वस्तू सांगता जे हांवें कितें ह्या व्हिडिओन म्हटलां तें हांव सामरी कशी दितां. हो हातकात्रो खांबो म्हणटात तो इन्क्विजिशनाच्या वेळार लोकांचे हात कातरूंक वापरूंक ना, आनी जे कोण धर्मांतरण करिनासले वा धर्म बदलिनासले तांकां व्हरोन त्या खांब्याक बांदून तांचे हात कापताले, तांची हड्डी कापताले अशें म्हणटा, असलें केन्नाच जावंक ना. हे जे म्हणटात असल्यो वस्तू म्हणटा, हे पंगड जे आसा, संगीत जे आसा, ते हे म्हणटा, तांची इन्फॉर्मेशन ही इन्फॉर्मेशन खंयच्यान येता? रिचर्ड झिमलर हांणी एक नॉवल बरयल्लें आसा, गार्डियन ऑफ द डॉन म्हणून. हें एक नॉवल, तें इज अ वर्क ऑफ फिक्शन, म्हणल्यार तें खरें घडूंक ना. सो फिक्शन म्हणजे मनांत आयिल्ली एक गोश्ट जी ताणें बरोवन दवरल्या, मनांत आयिल्ली रचना, ती खरी रचना न्हू. जाल्यार त्यो वस्तू घेवन ताका कांयच ऐतिहासीक पुरावे नासतना असल्यो वस्तू म्हणप हें वांकडें. इट इज नॉट करेक्ट. दुसरें, हो खांबो आतां खंयच्यान आयलो? पुर्तुगेजांनी इन्क्विजिशन गोंयानूच न्हू, जायते कडेन केलें. तशेंच पुर्तुगेजांनी न्हू, स्पेनाच्या लोकांनी केलें, रोमाक जाल्लें, जायत्या जायत्या जाग्यांचेर जाल्लें. ह्या वेगवेगळ्या जाग्यांचेर आनी पुर्तुगालाक लेगून जायते पिलर आसात, खांबे आसात. पूण खंयसरूच तूं खंयच्याय ह्या देशांनी वच, जो इन्क्विजिशन जाला, कोणूच तुका म्हणचो ना की बाबा एक खांबो आसलो थंय लोकांचे हात कापताले. खंयसरूच ना. हें गोंयानूच म्हणटात. अशें कित्याक? इन्क्विजिशन जरी तर गोंया सोडून दुसऱ्याय देशांनी जाल्लें, दुसऱ्या जाग्यांचेर जाल्लें, पुर्तुगेजां हाल, स्पेनीच्या लोकां हाल, वो रोमाच्या पापसाहेबाक हाल, कोणाचे हाला, सगळ्यांनी हे खांबे वापरूंक जासले न्हू. वो पुर्तुगेजांनी तरी आपल्या दुसऱ्या जाग्यांचेर वापरूंक जासले. कित्याक वापरूंक ना? कित्याक अशे पुरावे नात? कित्याक? इन्क्विजिशन जाता तेन्ना इन्क्विजिशनाचेर खांबो वापरप आनी लोकांचे हात कातरप हें पाप साहेबाच्या कायद्या प्रमाणे आड आसलें. अशें करूंक जायनासलें. आनी जांचेर कारवाय चलताली तांकां उपाशी मारप, तांकां चाबुकांनी मारून तांकां मोरोसो करप, अशें मान्यताय नासली. तांकां जिवे दवरपाची. कित्याक? इगोर्ज कितून मानता, हो क्रिस्तांव धर्म कितून मानता? क्रिस्तांव धरून बोगसड्यान मानता. मनीस जिवीत बदलतलो हातून मानता, पूण ताका जिवेशी मारचो हें मानवना. आनी हाका लागून तो मनीस आयकोच ना जाल्यार ताची जी प्रॉपर्टी आसता ते व्हरताले, यूज टू कॉन्फिस्केट प्रॉपर्टीज. ताचे कितें रायट्स आसात, ताची कितें गिरेस्तकाय आसा ते व्हरताले. अशें जातालें. जाल्यार हो हात कात्रो खांबो हाची काणी येयली कशी? गोंयांत जायते खांबे आसात त्या काळार लेगून. एक डच मनीस आयिल्लो गोंयांत भोंवतालो तो लिपचोरी आयिल्लो, आपूण पुर्तुगेज कसो म्हणून धापणे घालून आयिल्लो. ताणें सगळें पळयल्लें आनी पयले फावटी हाणें हे खांब्या विशीं बरयल्लें. पूण हो खांबो खंय आसलेलो? आयज गांधी सर्कल जो आसा ओल्ड गोवा थंय आशिल्लो म्हणटा. थंय ते रस्ते मेळटात न्हू, थंय तो बाजार जातालो. आनी तो म्हणटा हो पिलर आसा, थिंगा लोक येता, हें विकता, तें विकता, अशें अशें कोत्ता. आतां सेर्रांव म्हणून आसा, ह्या दाखल्या प्रमाणे हे पिलर जे आसा, तो खांबे जे आसा ते कित्याक वापरताले? थंय लोकांक हाडून घडये कोण चड वायट करता, किरमिदूर आसा, तांकां चाबुकांचो मार घालताले. कितें नोटीस आसा लोकांक सांगपाचो, थंय वचोन तो उबो रावन तो थंय भाशण करतालो वो सांगतालो, वो थंय बरयल्लो नोटीस मारताले. पूण ह्या पिलराचो इन्क्विजिशनाशी कसलो ताळमेळ आसा हाचो कसलेच पुरावे नात. आनी शेवटाक हांवें म्हटलें की पुरावे आसात की विजयनगर राज्य जें आसलें त्या राज्यांत लोकांक गुन्यांवकारांक खांब्याक बांदप, तांकां चाबुकांनी मारप, तांकां जिवेशी मारप, तांचे हात पांय कातरून उडोवप, हड्डी पासून कातरून उडोवप, हें विजयनगर राज्य जें आसा तें हें करतालें. आनी आमी जाणा विजयनगर राज्य गोंयांत आशिल्लें, जाल्यार हो खांबो घडये विजयनगर काळांतलो खांबो आसूं येत, वा विजयनगर काळांत ज्यो वस्तू घडल्यो ते खांब्यांक लागून उरल्यो आसतल्यो आनी लोकांक खबर ना तो खांबो खंयचो, आनी काडले आनी हें सगळें मन जें आसा, मन घडोवन जो नॅरेटीव आसा तो काडलो आनी ह्या खांब्याचेर मारलो. आतां तो खांबो खंयच्यान आयला ते आमी जायते शोध करूंक जाय. जरी तर तो खांबो पुर्तुगेज येवच्या आदीं आसा जाल्यार जरूर विजयनगर राज्य वा आदिलशाचें राज्य आशिल्लें तांच्यांनी ह्या खांब्याचो उपयोग केला जायत, कित्याक ते तसले प्रथा तांची चालू आसली. तेंची प्रथा आशिल्ली की बाबा कोणाचे हात काप, कोण गुन्यांवकारी आसा तांकां एक शारिरीक शिक्षा दिवची, पनिशमेंट दिवची, हें तांचें आशिल्लें. आनी हाका लागून बेश्टें कितें काडलें इन्क्विजिशनाक लायलें, खांबो काडलो इन्क्विजिशनाक लायलो हें सारकें न्हू. आनी दुसरें परतून परतून सेंट फ्रांसीस झेवियराक हातून हाडटात आनी म्हणटात ताणें इन्क्विजिशन, ताणें लोकांक मारलो. इन्क्विजिशन तो 8 वर्सां उपरांत मेल्या उपरांत इन्क्विजिशन आयलें. जाल्यार तुमी म्हाका सांगा तो जिवंत काय ना? कितें जाता तें पळोवंक जाय, ताणें कसो मारलो? आनी तो एकटोच न्हू जाणें इन्क्विजिशन मागलेलें, आनी 2 जाणांनी, मिंगेल वाज जो विकार जनरल आसलो गोंयचो ताणें मागलेलें, आनी एक मिशन पाद्री आसलेलो ताणें मागलेलें. दुसरें म्हणल्यार जुआंव तिसरो जो राजा आशिल्लो गोंयांत, ताणें तें हाडूंक ना, कित्याक तो जो राजा आशिल्लो तो सान फ्रांसीस शावेर आसतना तो राजा आशिल्लो. दुसरें म्हणल्यार सान फ्रांसीस शावेरान जेन्ना इन्क्विजिशन मागलें तें इंडियेकसून वा गोंयांसून मागोवंक ना, तें इंडोनेशियासून मागलेलें. कित्याक थंय जेन्ना तो गेलो, इंडोनेशियाक गेल्लो, ताणें पुर्तुगायजांक पयलें, ते क्रिस्तांव न्हू, ताणें पयलें हे क्रिस्तांव जावनूय क्रिस्तांव कशे जियेनात, वेगळ्योच वस्तू करतात, जे मुसलमान करतात, जे जुदेव करतात ते वस्तू करतात. म्हणजे कितें, 4-5 बायलां बरोबर रावप, वेगवेगळ्यो वस्तू करप, म्हणजे सारकें मिसाक वचप ना आनी कांय ना, आनी कितें कितें मानप, म्हणजे हें हालोवंक जायना, अशें भायर सरोंक जायना, ह्या दिसाक हें करूंक जायना, रगताक हात लावंक जायना. तशेंच दुसरे धर्म आशिल्ले आसपास, तांचे मान्यताय केन्ना ते मानताले. अशें न्हू की तांकां दुसऱ्या धर्मांचो मोग आशिल्लो, पूण भिरांतीन. आमकां सगल्यांक आमी जाणा, म्हाका तशें ना, पूण जायत्या जाणां हांव जाणा, क्रिस्तांव जावनूय ते मानतात थोडे, बाबा हो देंवचार आसा, तो देव आसा, हो देव आसा, कितलेशेच देव आसा, अशें थोडे मानतात. आनी मानतात म्हणून मागीर कितें करूंक वयतात, बळयो दिवंक वयतात, कोंबो दिवंक वयतात, बोकडी दिवंक वयतात, आनी केन्ना भुरग्यांची बळी करतात. आतां उसगांव कितें जालां तें आमी सारकें जाणा. पुलीस म्हणटा की ही बळी न्हू, भुरग्याची बळी न्हू, पूण गांवचो सगलो लोक म्हणटा ही भुरग्याचीच बळी म्हणून ते करताले. आजून पासून जर तर भुरग्याची बळी वा नर बळी असली प्रथा खंय तरी चालू आसा, लिपचोऱ्या लोक करता, मानता पासून आजून. चिंता तुमी 500 वर्सां फाटीं लोकांक शिक्षण नाशिल्लें, विज्ञान तितलें नाशिल्लें, ते कितले अशें करता आसतले. जाल्यार हाचेर आमी चिंतप घालूंक जाय, भर घालूंक जाय. आनी खरेपण इतिहास कितें ताका सारको तेंको दिवंक जाय. थँक यू फॉर वॉचिंग माय व्हिडियोज.